highest being in the estate sector, and also across deciles. So over 90% of households in the bottom 4 deciles use firewood and collect it as well, compared to only 40% in the top decile. Average access to electricity, and the question was in the HIES whether an electric line went by your house. And that was 90% on average, but only 80% for the bottom 2 deciles. So we see that there are overlapping deprivations, household overlapping deprivations, or overlaps between deprivations and risks. So households that use firewood for cooking are also likely to suffer from indoor air pollution. And within these households, women and children who spend the most time in the process of cooking are the most likely to be affected by indoor air pollution. Small children, because they are likely to be with their mothers while the mothers are cooking. The burden of time and effort for collecting water and firewood rests largely on women. If you look at vulnerability to local impacts, taking extreme weather events and tsunami, we see that more women than men died in the tsunami, and this was a study by Nilufer Dimel and several others in 2007. A study in South India pointed out that women across caste, class and occupations were disadvantaged in tsunami relief and recovery because of pre-existing gender norms and gender neutral or gender blind state policies. In Sri Lanka, I didn't have the opportunity to have a look at this, but my guess is that although our situation may not have been as bad as that of South India, we certainly had several issues in the immediate post-recovery situation and possibly in later post-recovery situation as well. Vulnerability to local impacts. So if we look at other natural disasters, floods, droughts and so on, we see that again very often it is the poor who are affected worse. We see not just in terms of risk to lives or livelihoods, but also in terms of health. So there's work that has been done by the Foundation for Environment, Climate and Technology, which shows that we have had a rise in malaria and possibly dengue as a result of rising temperatures. Okay, looking further at rainfall trends, and here I have borrowed from a colleague's slide here, which hasn't appeared here. We see that rainfall, if you compare 1970 to 1994 with 1900 to 1929, we certainly see that there's been a drop in rainfall, or the area that has low rainfall has increased, and this has implications for agriculture. One of the challenges that I'd like to pose before this audience today is that of paddy cultivation. We have agriculture policy that promotes paddy. We are very much looking in terms of sustainability in paddy. Yesterday's budget was going to support the export of rice from Sri Lanka. But what we need to keep in mind is that paddy cultivation is extremely water intensive, and that in years to come, that is going to have effects on how much we can produce and how much it will cost to produce. And how much it will cost to produce will invariably have an effect on food prices, which affect the poorest and people who are net consumers of paddy. Now, of course, it will have an effect on livelihoods, on people who earn their living, maybe not necessarily farmers themselves, but people who are laborers, agricultural laborers, who depend on farming for their to be hired for their daily living. Fisheries, again, although we don't have very much information, the effects of global warming on rising sea levels, the effects of coastal erosion are likely to have impacts on fishing, and of course there is a feedback that more and more unsustainable forms of fishing are likely to take place, and what kind of policies are we thinking of in terms of dealing with this. Energy and industry. Let me actually, this is again from a colleague's lecture notes, and in September 2010, she was already ahead of the Human Development Report in terms of comparing ecological footprint with HDI. And here she finds, this is Sri Lanka, this is USA, and Sri Lanka, although this is 2005, we are just a little ahead of the point where we were there. And the question she raises is, what will it take for us to get from here to here? This is USA, assuming that we want to end up like the USA, which actually has high HDI, but performs very badly in terms of the global footprint. What are we going to do to our natural resources? How are we going to contribute to global threats in this journey from here to here? Okay, so yeah. Would we rather be like this country over here, which has high HDI and does very well in terms of its ecological footprint? Possibly this country, which is not identified here, is Costa Rica, as pointed out in the report. In Costa Rica, I had the privilege of being there in February this year, and what was amazing is that everybody you spoke to attributed the fact of their being able to do well, especially in terms of human development, was because they didn't have a defense budget. Costa Rica does not have a military, and they spend that, they will tell you, it's very simplistic, and I'm sure there is much more to it, but they will tell you that it's because they do not spend money on the military. They spent all that money, since from 1955, if I remember right, they spend all that money on health and education. And I found it very hard to find a child under 5 who looked malnourished. We were taken to a nutrition clinic, and I asked the question, so how many children are malnourished? And they said, we haven't calculated the figures for this year. And I had the feeling the reason they said that was because actually the figures are very low. Okay, so in terms of primary energy supply in Sri Lanka, we have renewable sources and non-renewable sources. And the question my colleague asks here is again, how would development affect these percentages? Now there is good news, because we have here the Renewable Energy for Rural Economic Development program of the government, where what is being promoted is renewable energy, solar home systems, off-grid village hydros, which are typically small, wind energy, biomass projects. Okay, so to summarize, there are many deprivations that are suffered unequally in the country. There are challenges that we need to think of, which again will have unequal impacts. And finally, there are policy implications that need to be thought of very carefully, so that both the goal of equity and the goal of sustainability are achieved. Thank you.